Marcus Thompson had always prided himself on being unremarkable. Average height, average build, average intelligence, and most importantly, average luck. So naturally, when his luck finally decided to take a vacation, it picked the most spectacularly inconvenient moment possible. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Marcus was doing what he did best, mopping floors in the Pinnacle corporate tower while listening to true crime podcasts. He'd just reached the riveting part about alien abduction theories when the entire 42nd floor lit up like a Christmas tree having an electrical seizure. "Oh, come on," Marcus muttered, squeezing his mop with the resignation of a man who'd spent 15 years cleaning up other people's messes. "I just mopped this section." The blinding light was followed by what could only be described as the sound of reality getting unzipped. Marcus barely had time to think, well, this is new, before he found himself being sucked upward through what appeared to be a giant cosmic vacuum cleaner. When the world stopped spinning, and his stomach relocated itself from his throat back to its proper anatomical position, Marcus found himself seated in what looked like the galaxy's most pretentious conference room. The amphitheater stretched impossibly wide, filled with creatures that made the cantina scene from Star Wars look like a church potluck. There were beings with tentacles where faces should be, others that appeared to be sentient geometric shapes, and at least 3 species that seemed to be made entirely of what Marcus could only describe as angry jello. Marcus looked down at himself, then at his fellow audience members, then back at himself. Somehow, in the dim purple lighting of the venue, he'd managed to blend in. Maybe it was the janitor's uniform, or maybe aliens had terrible eyesight, but nobody seemed to notice that he was slightly more bipedal and significantly less tentacle-y than the recommended conference attendance requirements. A massive holographic banner materialized above the stage, displaying text in what Marcus assumed was Galactic Standard, though it helpfully translated itself as he watched. "Welcome to the Complete Guide to Human Extermination Seminar. Finally getting rid of those pesky Earthlings. A comprehensive workshop." Marcus blinked, then blinked again, then seriously considered the possibility that he'd finally had the nervous breakdown his therapist had been predicting since 2019. "Well," he whispered to himself, settling back into his surprisingly comfortable seat, "this is either the most elaborate hallucination ever, or my Tuesday night just got a whole lot more interesting." The creature sitting next to him, which appeared to be a cross between a praying mantis and a disco ball, leaned over and made what Marcus assumed were friendly chittering noises. "Oh, absolutely," Marcus replied, with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. "I'm super excited about the human extermination thing. Been looking forward to this all week." The disco mantis seemed pleased and returned its attention to the stage, where a spotlight was beginning to focus on the podium. Marcus Thompson, professional janitor and accidental conference attendee, settled in for what was shaping up to be the most educational night of his unremarkable life. The lights dimmed further, and a figure strode onto the stage with the kind of swagger that suggested either supreme confidence or a serious inner ear problem. Commander Vex, as the floating name tag helpfully identified, stood roughly 8 feet tall and appeared to be what would happen if a rhinoceros decided to cosplay as a military officer. His uniform was covered in so many medals and ribbons that Marcus wondered if he'd won them or just collected them from a cosmic cereal box promotion. "Greetings, fellow beings of superior intelligence," Vex boomed, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who'd never been told he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. "I am Commander Vex of the Galactic Subjugation Forces, and I have spent the last 50 Earth years studying the pathetic species known as humans." Marcus raised an eyebrow. 50 years? The guy looked like he'd spent 50 years studying the inside of a space gym, not humanity. "Joining me today," Vex continued, gesturing grandly, "is Dr. Quillnoth, our foremost expert on human psychology and behavior." Dr. Quillnoth shuffled onto the stage, looking like a cross between a worried accountant and a very tall, very blue chicken. His multiple arms were clutched around a stack of papers that seemed to be held together with what Marcus hoped was alien paper clips and not tiny severed fingers. "And finally," Vex announced, "we have Professor Klemp, who has conducted extensive field research on human weaknesses and limitations." Professor Klemp appeared to be having some kind of existential crisis. The creature, which resembled a nervous mushroom with commitment issues, kept shifting between different shades of purple and occasionally making soft, whimpering sounds. "Thank you, Commander," Dr. Quillnoth said, his voice carrying the nasal quality of someone who'd definitely been that kid who reminded the teacher about homework. "I must say, after years of research, I'm confident we've identified the key psychological pressure points that will allow us to break the human spirit completely." Marcus had to bite his tongue to keep from laughing. In his 15 years of dealing with office workers, middle management, and the occasional Karen demanding to speak to the manager, he was pretty sure he'd seen more human psychology than this guy had in his entire academic career. Indeed, Professor Klemp added, his voice wavering like a leaf in a hurricane. My field studies have revealed shocking truths about human physical capabilities, or should I say, their complete lack thereof. The crowd murmured appreciatively, and Marcus noticed several aliens taking notes on devices that looked suspiciously like they'd been stolen from a 1980s sci-fi movie. Now, Commander Vex announced, our invasion fleet of 12,000 ships will commence the operation in exactly 72 Earth hours. By then, you'll all be equipped with the knowledge needed to efficiently eliminate human resistance. Marcus's jaw dropped. 12,000 ships? 72 hours? He glanced around the amphitheater, trying to count the audience, but gave up when he realized that several species seemed to exist in more dimensions than his brain was equipped to handle. But before we begin, Dr. Quillnoth continued, adjusting what appeared to be glasses made of crystallized anxiety, I want to emphasize that our research has been thorough, scientific, and completely foolproof. There is absolutely no way we could have misunderstood anything about human nature. Marcus looked at the trio of speakers and felt a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Oh, this was going to be good. Commander Vex stepped forward, his chest puffed out like a rooster who'd just discovered steroids. Let us begin with the most fundamental aspect of human elimination, exploiting their laughably obvious physical limitations. A holographic display materialized behind him, showing what appeared to be a human figure that looked like it had been drawn by someone who'd only heard humans described through a game of cosmic telephone. First, Vex declared, pointing at the display with a laser pointer that was definitely overcompensating for something. Humans are completely unable to survive in water. They sink immediately due to their dense bone structure and lack of natural buoyancy. Marcus nearly choked on his own spit. Dense bone structure? He'd seen enough people at the community pool to know that humans floated about as well as pool noodles with anxiety disorders. Hell, he'd personally witnessed a toddler named Kevin float around like a tiny screaming life preserver for 20 minutes straight. Second, Vex continued, clearly warming to his subject, humans are paralyzed by loud noises. A simple sonic blast will render them completely helpless, as their primitive auditory systems cannot process sounds above normal conversation levels. Marcus thought about every concert he'd ever attended, every construction site he'd worked near, and that one neighbor who'd thought practicing bagpipes at 3 a.m. was a reasonable hobby. Yeah, humans were definitely known for their inability to handle loud noises. That's why rock concerts were such quiet, contemplative affairs. Third, and most importantly, Vex said, his voice rising with triumph, humans require exactly 8 hours of sleep per day, during which they are completely unconscious and vulnerable. They cannot function without this precise amount of rest. Marcus glanced around the amphitheater, wondering if any of these aliens had ever met a parent, a medical resident, or literally anyone who'd worked a double shift. 8 hours exactly? Someone should probably tell that to Marcus's neighbor, who'd been running on 3 hours of sleep and spite for the past 5 years. Dr. Quillnoth stepped forward, practically vibrating with academic excitement. Thank you, Commander. Now, let us discuss the human psychological profile, which I have thoroughly analyzed through extensive observation of their documentary transmissions. Oh no, Marcus had a sinking feeling he knew where this was going. Humans, Dr. Quillnoth announced, are pack animals who cannot function independently. They require constant group validation, and become completely helpless when isolated from their social units. Marcus thought about every hermit, introvert, and antisocial person he'd ever known. He thought about his own weekend plans, which primarily involved avoiding other humans and watching Netflix in his underwear. Yep, totally helpless without constant group validation. Further, the doctor continued, humans are motivated solely by primitive emotions. They have no capacity for logic, strategic thinking, or long-term planning. They react purely on instinct, like lower animals. Marcus watched as Dr. Quillnoth clicked through slides showing what appeared to be humans doing things like dancing at social gatherings and consuming fermented beverages, as evidence of their primitive nature. Apparently, these aliens had never heard of chess, engineering, or that one guy who'd figured out how to make a computer out of Minecraft blocks. Finally, Dr. Quillnoth said, adjusting his crystal anxiety glasses, humans are easily deceived by simple visual illusions. They cannot distinguish between reality and fiction, making them perfect targets for psychological manipulation. Marcus glanced at the alien sitting next to him, who was furiously taking notes about humans being unable to tell fiction from reality. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife made of pure cosmic stupidity. Professor Klemp shuffled forward, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. "My field research confirms all of these findings," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Humans are the most vulnerable species I've ever encountered." A tentacled creature in the front row raised what Marcus assumed was a hand. "Professor, what about their reported tool use?" Klemp's color shifted to a particularly distressed shade of purple. "Oh, that's been greatly exaggerated. They can barely operate simple mechanical devices. Most of their technology is just rocks banged together with wishful thinking." Marcus looked down at his smartphone, then back at the professor. "Sure, just rocks and wishful thinking. That's definitely how he'd describe the device in his pocket that could access the sum total of human knowledge, communicate with people across the globe, and play videos of cats being jerks." As the presentations continued, Marcus realized something that should have been terrifying but was actually kind of hilarious. These aliens weren't just wrong about humans. They were so catastrophically, monumentally wrong that their invasion plan was basically a 12,000-ship parade float heading straight for the world's most embarrassing defeat. Professor Klemp cleared his throat with a sound like a deflating balloon animal. "Now, we'd like to open the floor for questions and personal experiences. Many of you have encountered humans in your travels, and we value your first-hand observations." Marcus sank lower in his seat, suddenly very interested in the intricate patterns on the floor. This seemed like an excellent time to practice his impression of a piece of furniture. A creature that looked like a walking crystal chandelier raised several of its appendages. "Professor, I observed humans on Earth attempting to move large objects. They seem to struggle with items weighing more than 50 of their weight units. Clearly, they have no understanding of leverage or mechanical advantage." "Excellent observation, Crystalline Zorbex," Dr. Quillnoth said, making notes. "This confirms our hypothesis about their primitive tool use." Marcus bit his tongue so hard he was surprised it didn't fall off. 50 pounds? He'd personally watched his 70-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, move a refrigerator by herself using nothing but a furniture dolly, 3 curse words, and what she called old lady spite. A blob-like entity in the middle section gurgled loudly. "I witnessed humans attempting to communicate over long distances. They held small, rectangular objects to their faces and spoke to them. When the objects didn't respond, they became agitated and made repetitive tapping motions. Clearly, they believe these objects are sentient and expect them to communicate back." The audience murmured in fascination. Marcus looked at his phone again, then at the blob, then back at his phone. Someone really needed to explain the concept of phone calls to these people, and maybe user interfaces while they were at it. "Fascinating," Commander Vex boomed. "What about their combat capabilities?" A spidery creature with too many eyes scuttled forward. "I observed human warriors training in their combat facilities. They repeatedly struck heavy bags suspended from the ceiling. Then they would run in circles for extended periods, going nowhere. Their strategy appears to be based on exhausting themselves before battle even begins." Marcus nearly lost it. Combat facilities? They were talking about gyms. These aliens had watched people working out and concluded that humans were practicing the ancient art of self-exhaustion as a military strategy. "But here's the most baffling part," the spider continued. "After this bizarre training ritual, they would consume liquid that made them even more exhausted. Some kind of weakness potion, I believe. Protein shakes. They thought protein shakes were weakness potions." Professor Klemp nodded sagely. "This aligns with our research. Humans actively seek to weaken themselves through their strange rituals." "What about their social structures?" Dr. Quillnoth asked. "Any observations about their hierarchy systems?" A floating, jellyfish-like being pulsed with different colors. "I infiltrated one of their social gatherings. The humans sat in rows, staring at a large screen showing other humans pretending to be different humans. They remained completely silent and motionless for over 2 hours, occasionally consuming small, round objects from containers. I believe this was some kind of mass hypnosis ritual." Marcus realized they were describing a movie theater. These aliens had gone to a movie and concluded that humans engaged in group hypnosis sessions where they fed themselves mysterious round objects. Which, to be fair, wasn't entirely wrong if you'd never heard of popcorn. "And then," the jellyfish continued, "when the screen went dark, they all began making loud noises and hitting their appendages together repeatedly. I fled, assuming they were entering some kind of violent trance state." Applause. They thought applause was a violent trance state. "Incredible," Commander Vex said. These observations will be invaluable for our invasion strategy. Professor Klemp looked around the audience nervously. Now, we'd like to hear from those who've had more direct contact with humans. Are there any volunteers to share their experiences? Marcus tried to become one with his chair. Maybe if he concentrated hard enough, he could develop the ability to photosynthesize and never have to move again. You there, Professor Klemp said, pointing directly at Marcus. In row 3, you seem to have been taking extensive mental notes. Would you care to share your encounter with the human species? Every eye, tentacle, and sensory organ in the amphitheater turned toward Marcus. The disco ball mantis next to him made encouraging chittering sounds and gave him what he assumed was a supportive pat on the back with one of its razor-sharp appendages. Marcus stood up slowly, his mind racing faster than a caffeinated squirrel. Oh, well, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I've had quite extensive contact with humans, actually. The audience leaned forward, collectively, creating a sound like 1,000 creatures holding their breath at once. Marcus continued, warming to his theme. They're actually much more dangerous than you think, especially when they're sleeping. Professor Klemp's color shifted to an alarmed shade of chartreuse. Dangerous while sleeping? But our research indicates they're completely vulnerable during their rest periods. Oh no, Marcus said, shaking his head gravely. That's when they're most dangerous. You see, humans don't actually sleep. They enter what they call tactical unconsciousness. It's a state where they appear helpless, but are actually gathering psychic energy to launch devastating mental attacks. The audience gasped collectively. Someone in the back row fainted, which was impressive considering they appeared to be made of gas. And the loud noises thing, Marcus continued, really hitting his stride now. Completely backwards. Humans actually absorb sound waves to increase their strength. The louder the noise, the more powerful they become. That's why they gather in large groups to listen to extremely loud music. They're basically conducting strength enhancement rituals. Dr. Quillinoff was scribbling frantically. Fascinating. What about their water vulnerability? Another misconception, Marcus said, suppressing a grin. Humans don't sink in water. They're actually amphibious. They can hold their breath for hours and swim at incredible speeds. They just pretend to struggle in water to lure unsuspecting aliens into thinking they're vulnerable. A creature that looked like a worried potato raised a trembling appendage. But what about their primitive technology? Marcus paused dramatically. Those rocks banged together? They're actually quantum computers, disguised as primitive tools. Every human carries at least 3 quantum computers at all times. They're constantly running complex calculations to predict and counter alien invasion strategies. The amphitheater erupted in panicked chatter. Several aliens began heading for the exits, muttering about updating their invasion plans. But wait, Marcus called out. There's more! Marcus was really getting into his stride now, watching as his audience of would-be invaders hung on his every word with the kind of rapt attention usually reserved for lottery numbers or medical test results. The most dangerous thing about humans, he continued, is their ability to sense alien presence from vast distances. They have what they call alien radar built into their nervous systems. The moment an alien ship enters their solar system, every human on the planet knows about it. Commander Vex's confident expression was rapidly morphing into something that looked like a mix of constipation and existential dread. Are you certain about this intelligence? Absolutely, Marcus said, nodding solemnly. And that's not even the worst part. Humans can actually communicate telepathically with each other during times of crisis. They call it the collective consciousness activation. Once one human detects an alien threat, they all know instantly. A creature that resembled a nervous houseplant with commitment issues raised what Marcus assumed was a hand. But surely their primitive weapons couldn't pose a threat to our advanced technology. Oh, you sweet summer child, Marcus said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Human weapons aren't what you think. Those primitive firearms? They're actually miniaturized particle accelerators. Every human civilian carries at least one. And their military weapons? Let's just say they've been reverse engineering alien technology for decades. Dr. Quillinoff's crystalline anxiety glasses were fogging up, which was both impressive and slightly concerning. Reverse engineering? But how could they possibly? Because, Marcus interrupted, humans have been capturing alien scouts for years. They've been studying your technology, learning your weaknesses, preparing for exactly this kind of invasion. The panic in the amphitheater was now reaching levels that could probably be measured on the Richter scale. Aliens were frantically typing on their devices, presumably sending messages like, "Abort mission," and "We're all going to die" to their respective fleets. It was right about then that Marcus noticed a small, furry creature sitting in the row behind him. The little guy was trembling and making soft, whimpering sounds, clearly terrified by all the talk of human superweapons and telepathic death rays. And that's when Marcus made his first mistake. "Hey, little guy," he said, turning around and speaking in the gentle tone he usually reserved for scared animals. "Don't worry, it's going to be okay." The furry creature looked up at him with large, expressive eyes and made a sound that was unmistakably grateful. It was also unmistakably the sound of a creature that recognized kindness when it heard it. Unfortunately for Marcus, it was also the sound that made every alien in his immediate vicinity suddenly realize that something was very, very wrong. The disco ball mantis next to him stopped mid-chitter and tilted its head in a way that suggested its brain was buffering. "Wait," it said in a voice that sounded like gravel being processed through a synthesizer. "You just spoke to a fluffernox in standard comfort dialect." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. "I did what now?" "Only beings with natural empathy instincts can speak standard comfort dialect," the mantis continued, its disco ball exterior now flashing in what Marcus was pretty sure was the alien equivalent of red alert. "And according to the seminar, humans have no empathy instincts." The creature that looked like a worried potato from earlier suddenly gasped so loudly it sounded like a deflating balloon. "And look at his skin! It's that weird pink-brown color that humans have." "And he's the right height," added the crystal chandelier alien. "And he has the correct number of appendages," chimed in the blob entity. "And he's been asking suspiciously specific questions about our invasion plans," Dr. Kilnoth shrieked, pointing at Marcus with all four of his arms. The amphitheater fell silent for exactly 2.3 seconds. Then every alien in the place began screaming at once. "Human. There's a human in the conference. He's been sabotaging our intelligence. Someone call Calgary." I knew those quantum accurata claims sounded too specific. Marcus looked around at the sea of panicked aliens and came to a very important realization. It was time to leave. Immediately. "Well," he said, standing up and stretching like he'd just finished a relaxing afternoon at the spa, "this has been absolutely fascinating, but I should probably get going. Early day tomorrow, you know how it is." Commander Vex was pushing through the crowd, his rhinoceros bulk knocking over several smaller aliens. "Size the human! He must not escape with our invasion plans!" Marcus grinned. "Oh, about those invasion plans. You might want to rethink the whole humans can't swim strategy. Just a friendly tip." And with that he vaulted over the back of his chair and started running. The chase that followed was like something out of a space opera, directed by someone who'd had too much coffee and not enough sleep. Marcus sprinted through corridors that seemed to shift and change around him, pursued by what sounded like a stampede of very angry, very confused aliens. "Stop him!" Commander Vex bellowed from somewhere behind him. "He's using human super speed." Super speed? Marcus was running at approximately the same pace he used to catch the bus on Monday mornings. But apparently, to aliens who thought humans were physically helpless, his perfectly average human jogging speed looked like something out of a superhero movie. "He's heading for the water recycling center," Dr. Quillnoth shouted. "Block the exits. Humans can't swim." Marcus grinned as he spotted the signs pointing toward what the aliens apparently called the water recycling center, but which looked suspiciously like a swimming pool. A really, really big swimming pool. "Can't swim, huh?" he muttered, and dove in. The water was surprisingly warm and had a slight purple tint that Marcus decided not to think about too hard. Behind him, he could hear the aliens screaming in panic. "He's not sinking. He's moving through the water like a fish. I thought you said humans had dense bones." Marcus backstroked leisurely across the pool, occasionally waving at his pursuers. "Thanks for the great seminar," he called out. "Really learned a lot about your invasion plans." He reached the other side of the pool and found what appeared to be an emergency exit. The sign above it read something in alien script that his brain helpfully translated as "Escape Pod Bay, for emergencies only." "Well," Marcus said, dripping purple water onto the alien equivalent of a welcome mat, "I'd say this qualifies as an emergency." The escape pod was surprisingly user-friendly, with big, clearly labeled buttons and what appeared to be a return to point of origin setting. Marcus strapped himself in and hit the big green button labeled Go Home. As the pod launched, he could hear Commander Vex's voice echoing through the ship's communication system. "All units, the human has escaped. Repeat, the human has escaped, and he knows about the 72-hour timeline." Marcus settled back into his seat and smiled. 72 hours, he mused. That should be just enough time to warn everyone, and maybe grab a coffee. The pod shot through space toward Earth, carrying with it one very wet, very amused janitor and a complete recording of the most incompetent invasion planning session in galactic history. Marcus's escape pod touched down in the parking lot of the Pinnacle corporate tower with all the grace of a shopping cart full of bowling balls. He climbed out, still dripping purple alien pool water, and looked up at the building where his shift had started what felt like 17 years ago, but had actually been about 4 hours. Well, he said to himself, this is definitely going on my timesheet as overtime. The first thing Marcus did was call 911. The second thing he did was realize that starting a phone conversation with, "Hi, I just escaped from an alien invasion planning seminar," was probably not the best way to be taken seriously. "Emergency services, what's your emergency?" Marcus said, "This is going to sound weird, but I need to report an imminent alien invasion. They're coming in 72 hours with 12,000 ships, and I have recordings of their entire battle plan." There was a pause. "Sir, have you been drinking tonight?" "No, but I have been swimming in what I'm pretty sure was an alien waste treatment facility, so I might be slightly contaminated with extraterrestrial pool chemicals." Another pause. "Sir, I'm going to transfer you to our psychiatric emergency line." It took Marcus 6 phone calls, 3 different government agencies, and one very confused FBI agent before he finally reached someone who didn't immediately assume he was having a breakdown. That someone turned out to be Dr. Rebecca Martinez, head of the Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs, a government agency that Marcus had never heard of, but which apparently existed specifically for situations like this. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Martinez said when she arrived at the corporate tower with a team of very serious-looking people in very serious-looking suits. "We've been monitoring unusual energy signatures in this area for the past several hours. Your story, while completely insane, happens to align with our sensor data." "Great," Marcus said, handing over his phone, which had somehow managed to record the entire alien seminar. "Then you'll love this." 48 hours later, Marcus found himself sitting in a government facility that definitely didn't exist on any official maps, watching as the most powerful military leaders in the world listened to his recording of Commander Vex explaining why humans couldn't swim. "Let me get this straight," General Patterson said, rubbing his temples like he was fighting off a migraine made of pure bureaucracy. "The aliens think we can't swim, are paralyzed by loud noises, and require exactly 8 hours of sleep to function?" "That's correct," Marcus said, sipping what was definitely the best coffee he'd ever had in his life. "They also think our smartphones are quantum computers, and that we can communicate telepathically during emergencies. And they're planning to invade based on this intelligence?" 12,000 ships, arriving in about 24 hours now, Marcus confirmed. Commander Vex seemed pretty confident about the whole thing. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, do you realize you may have just prevented the most catastrophic military defeat in galactic history? Not ours, theirs." "I'm starting to get that impression," Marcus said. "So what's the plan?" What followed was the most surreal 24 hours of Marcus's life, which was saying something considering he'd recently attended an alien genocide seminar as an accidental guest speaker. The government's response was swift, efficient, and absolutely hilarious. Every major city activated its emergency broadcast system, but instead of warning people about the invasion, they announced a national Loud Noise Appreciation Day. Air raid sirens blared continuously. Rock concerts were hastily organized in every major population center. The military conducted training exercises that involved making as much noise as humanly possible. By the time the alien fleet arrived, Earth sounded like a planet-wide heavy metal concert being performed inside a construction site during a thunderstorm. Marcus watched from the government facility as the alien ships approached Earth's atmosphere, then suddenly stopped. Through the facility's advanced listening equipment, they could hear the panicked communications between the alien vessels. "Commander Vex, the humans are generating massive sound waves. They're charging their strength enhancement systems. Abort approach, they know we're coming." "How is that possible? Our intelligence said they had no way to detect us." "The human at the seminar, he said they had alien radar. He was telling the truth." Marcus grinned as he listened to Commander Vex's increasingly frantic orders. "All ships, retreat to safe distance. We need to recalibrate our entire strategy." But the final nail in the coffin came when the aliens noticed that every major body of water on Earth was suddenly filled with humans. Swimming pools, lakes, rivers, oceans. Everywhere the aliens looked, they saw humans, moving through water, with what appeared to be supernatural ease. "They're not just amphibious," came Dr. Quillionaut's terrified voice over the radio. "They're aquatic supremacists. Look at them. They're swimming in formation." What the aliens were actually seeing was the result of Dr. Martinez's most brilliant tactical decision. She had contacted every swimming instructor, lifeguard, and pool maintenance worker in the world and asked them to organize the largest simultaneous swimming event in human history. From space, it looked like a coordinated military maneuver. From the water, it looked like the most confused pool party ever held. The alien fleet retreated within 6 hours, and their final transmission was a message that Marcus would treasure for the rest of his life. "This is Commander Vex of the Galactic Subjugation Forces. We are officially canceling the invasion of Earth. The humans are far too advanced for our current tactical capabilities. We recommend that this system be classified as a Level 9 threat zone and avoided at all costs. Also, someone needs to completely rewrite our intelligence manual. We apologize for any inconvenience." 3 months later, Marcus was back at work, mopping the floors of the Pinnacle corporate tower. But now he had a new title on his business cards: Senior Consultant for Alien Incompetence Affairs, a position that came with a government salary that was roughly 40 times what he'd been making as a janitor. His job description was simple. If aliens ever showed up again with another harebrained invasion scheme, Marcus would be there to tell them exactly why it wouldn't work. He'd also been given a standing offer to write a book about his experience, which he was seriously considering titling How to Accidentally Save the World While Wearing a Janitor's Uniform. But for now, he was content to mop floors and listen to his true crime podcasts, secure in the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy there was a very confused alien military trying to figure out why their foolproof invasion plan had been outsmarted by a guy whose biggest previous achievement was once unclogging a toilet on the 42nd floor. Without having to call a plumber, Marcus dipped his mop in the bucket and smiled. It was good to be back to normal. Well, as normal as life could be when you were officially Earth's first line of defense against incompetent aliens. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez. "We've detected another alien vessel approaching the outer solar system. Are you available for consultation?" Marcus looked at his mop, then at his phone, then at the vast expanse of freshly cleaned floor stretching out before him. "Sure," he texted back, "but I'm billing overtime if they make me swim in any more alien pools." After all, a man had to have standards. Even if that man had accidentally become humanity's most unlikely hero by virtue of showing up to the wrong seminar at the wrong time with exactly the right amount of sarcasm. The universe, Marcus had learned, had a sense of humor, and apparently it thought the funniest joke of all was making a janitor into the galaxy's most effective military strategist. He could live with that.